Okay, so lately we have been solving these equations. And graphically, when we solve the equations, what does it look like on the graph when we find the solution? The x-intercepts, good. And if we weren't doing it by graphing, we had other methods. Does anybody remember a different method that we had besides graphing? Doing square roots, yep. And there was another method, factoring. Now, for factoring, it had to work nicely so you could actually get what multiplies together to give you those numbers and adds to give you the number in the middle. Like, it had to work. But there are other x-intercepts that you could find, but you can't get them by factoring because they come in decimal form. Factoring, those are all those nice answers. So there are some times where we can't solve it by factoring. And so we have a new method that we're learning today that works for every single kind. You can't always do square roots. To do square roots, you have to have something squared to do square roots both sides. It doesn't always work. Factoring doesn't always work. Graphing doesn't always work because it could hit at a horrible decimal that you can't find. But this new method called complete the square always works. Now, if you were in geometry last year, you should have done complete the square. If you are in geometry this year because you're doubling up, you haven't done it yet. So you're learning it in my class and then we'll use it again in geometry. Okay? I don't know if Algebra 1 taught it or not. I do not know if they do. So we are going to learn how to complete the square by doing a couple different things first that aren't really complete the square, but they get us to that step where we complete the square. So when you do your homework's going to be the same order as most. So the first kind of questions in your homework are going to look like this. It's going to say solve x squared minus 16x plus 64 equals 100 using square roots. What I want you to do is the trinomial x squared minus 16x plus 64. Just the trinomial, I want you to factor that. Just the trinomial part. Leave the equals 100 there. Because normally when we factor, we make it to equal 0. We're not going to do that just for today. So pause on that. Do this. Because I don't want you to miss the new material. Check your battery. Make sure you're not going to lose it. Maybe stay just in case. Okay, so we're factoring x squared, and we still have equals 100 on it. We still have equals 100. We still have equals 100 after we factor it. No, I just want you to take just part I underlined x squared minus 16x plus 64x. And just factor that. Like, don't do anything with equals 100 to be there. Yeah, do what you're doing. Just factor it. Okay, so it's almost factored. Use one more step. One more step. No. Just to factor it, give one more step because what can you tell me about both of those?
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm saying? What can you tell me about both of your terms? So how do you write that? You're almost done. You got one more step. You got it. Okay. What? Oh, you're just checking. Is that me you're laughing at? I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. So, it's not going to be circled because I'm not final answer. That's just my step. So, write equals 100. You got it right. Just write equals 100. So, okay. So, when you factor this correctly, you have x minus 8 squared equals 100. So what we've done is we changed the trinomial into a perfect square of two binomials. Perfect square. This, by the way, is called a perfect square trinomial because when you factor it, it turns into something square. And before you factor it, it's a trinomial. So it's called perfect square trinomial. All right, at this point, you can use your square root method where you square root both sides. But if I put the square root in, what else do I have to do? I also have to add in a plus minus. So now we're going to square root x minus 8 squared. The squared and the square root are opposite operations. We write x minus 8. Other side, plus minus square root of 100. And you say, what is the square root of 100? Okay, so we have x minus 8 equals plus minus 10. And then you say, how do I get x by itself? Add 8. Thanks, I was actually asking you guys to answer that. So I have x equals, now when I add that 8 and there's like a plus minus, I always put it in front. I always put the 8 in front, then the plus minus sign, then the 10. Can I add together an 8 and a 10? That's something I'm allowed to do. Then I'm going to do it. I have two answers here though. I have 8 plus 10, and I also have 8 minus 10. There's two answers. Remember, we're getting two answers for all these? 8 plus 10 is 18. 8 minus 10 is negative 2. How do we write our solutions? There's two answers. X equals fancy bracket. Almost. Why put negative 2 first? The smaller number. You like put them in numerical. So you could have solved that by solving, like making it set equal to 0 and solve it by factoring also, but I'm teaching you a different method that also works. It's called completing the square. So that's kind of like the first step of it, but that's not the whole thing. But before we get there, I have 3 examples that are in the student practice. You're going to try those. I'm going to come around and check your paper with my very special sparkly pen. Then we'll go over the answers. Is it recording? Yes. Okay. So we have worked out the answers. The first thing that you needed to do was factor it. Each one of these was a nice, easy, perfect square. We factored them. Then you move that number over. So for this one, I got negative 2 plus or minus 6. And then where I was seeing the problems was from there. Some of us were putting the plus minus in the wrong spot. Some of us weren't making it a negative 2, like silly mistakes. Just make sure you write the negative 2 first, then the plus minus 6. So you do negative 2 positive, plus 6 and negative 2 minus 6. The minus is always going to be the smaller answer too, just if you want to put them in order. And then for the middle one, we squared, we factored both sides. Or not both sides. We factored the left side. We got the square, then we square rooted it. So we got plus minus 1. Moved it over, 3 plus 1 and 3 minus 1. And then the last one, factored it. We got x minus 11 squared. Square root, plus minus 9. 11 plus 9, 11 minus 9 gets you 2 answers. Okay? All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start the next process towards learning what this complete the square is. Here we have a polynomial. I'll just write it a little bit bigger. X squared plus 14x plus c. We need this polynomial to be one that I could factor, and it would look something like that. It would be x plus some number squared. We need it to be factorable. So do not yell the answer out. I want you to think for a moment for yourself. What could c equal right here? What could that constant spot be so that I could factor it and have both factors be exactly the same thing so it would be squared? Don't say it out loud. You do not have to say the answer out loud. I just want to see a show of hands of who thinks they know the answer. I'm not asking you to tell me the answer. I'm asking who, because I can't see what's in your head. Who thinks they know the answer right now? All right, 10 more seconds. How would you know if you do it for real? Like, how would you figure that out? Like, factor it, yeah. If you think you know the number, factor it. Sure. I mean, if you're right, you're not going to erase it if you're right. Okay, so I would start thinking about when I FOIL stuff together, the first term is going to be x times x, give me x squared. The last term is something times something to give me c, but those somethings have to be the same. So whatever they are, when I FOIL the outside and the inside, what do I get for these two things? I don't know the number yet, but like what would I get if this is x times same? No? It's going to be like the same thing. Whatever they are, it's going to be like same x and same x. So when I add them together, I would have twice that same x. So we're going to undo that. You're going to take that 14 and you're going to do what to it? Divide it by 2. That's going to tell us what number goes here. But how do I get what c is? So if this was a 7 and this was a 7, what would c be? It would be this number squared, 49. Okay? So a formula to always get the c value is that you take the b value, the middle term, that b, so c equals b divided by 2 squared. You take the middle term, you half it, and you square it. And that will work because these are going to be the same number. So now there's 3 examples to try. You try. Find just the c value. You don't have to factor it. You can factor it if you're checking to see if you're right. But you don't have to factor it. Find the c value. Okay, so this one we did 8 divided by 2 squared. So you got 4 squared, 16, right? So x plus 4 squared is what the factored version is. This one we did negative 2 divided by 2 squared. So negative 1 squared, and when we square negative, we always get a positive. C is 1. And then this would be written as x minus 1 squared. And then the last one, we do negative 9 divided by 2 squared, and this is the one I was talking about. Some of you were making it harder, you needed to. If you're squaring a fraction, you just multiply the fraction times itself, so you're just thinking to yourself, negative 9 over 2 times negative 9 over 2. Basically, we multiply negative 9 times negative 9, and 2 times 2. 81 over 4. So all of you that multiply that out with like like 4.5 times 4.5, and you're like carry this and that, and I'm like just do it this way. It's so much easier. And then factoring it, it would be x minus, and then you just use the 9/2 there before you square it for that spot. Okay. So the first 2 kinds of examples are leading us up to what's now called complete the square. So we're going to do the full complete the square. I'm going to write some steps. I'm going to use different colors for this if you're, doing the different color thing. So I'm going to start by writing some steps. So we're on example 3. We're going to solve this by completing the square. So to solve it by completing the square, the very first thing that you want to do is that plus 7, that constant, we're going to move that to the other side. So move constant to other side. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides of my equation. And when I'm writing this, I am purposely leaving a space after the minus 10x. After you move the constant to the other side, put in squares. So on both sides, I have to do it to both sides of the equation. If I do one thing to one side, I have to do it to the other. So both sides of the equation, we're going to put plus square. And I chose a square because this is called complete the square. So I put something in there. Okay. So my next step is we're going to find the C to make a perfect square trinomial. So that thing that we were just doing where you're finding the C, there's like a formula for it. Does anybody remember that formula we just went over? B over 2 squared. We're going to do that. So I'm going to take my B, which is negative 10, divided by 2, and then square that. So negative 5 squared. So $25. Thank you. So what I'm going to do with that 25 is that's going to go in the squares. And it goes to both sides. Because if I do it to one side, I have to add the same amount to both sides. So that's what I mean by complete the square. Find what goes in there and stick it in the square. Step 3. Factor the perfect square trinomial. That's where we make something squared. We just did that also at the beginning of our notes today. So we're going to factor the perfect square trinomial. The trinomial I'm going to factor, and I'm going to have x what? Minus 5 squared equals, and then the other side I'll go ahead and add negative 7 to 25 and get 18. And in step 4, we're going to, at this step, be able to solve by square roots. Because at this step, we should have something that I can square root. My whole side should be something squared, so we're going to square root it. And what do we have to do if we square root? Remember, there's a plus or minus in there. I'll just put it in here so we have it in our notes. So I'm going to square root both sides. And if I square root, I'm going to put plus minus in. Square root undoes squared, so I'll have x minus 5 equals plus minus square root 18. Is there a square root of 18? There is not. So this is going to be an ugly answer. That's okay. We can handle it. So we're going to actually simplify square root 18. So what can I break down square root of 18? What perfect square can I pull out of 18? 9 is square root 2. That becomes 3 radical 2. So we're going to simplify it. So you get x minus 5 equals plus minus 3 radical 2. Did you run out of space yet? Sorry. I meant to warn you ahead of time. Now I have to get x by itself, so I'm going to add that 5 to the other side. But I'm going to put it in front of the plus minus. So I have x equals 5 plus or minus 3 radical 2. We cannot add together the 3 and the 5. As order of operations, I have to actually multiply the 3 by the radical 2 first. But I can't because it's not, I don't know what radical 2 is, so I just leave it. There's 2 answers sitting here. So if I'm doing this on paper, I would write fancy brackets. If you're doing it on the computer, you have to enter the two solutions separately. So what are the two solutions? The first one would be 5 plus 3 radical 2. And the second one would be 5 minus 3 radical 2. And you can't combine those because of the square root of 2, so you just need it. Okay? It's not bad. It's just a few steps. Let's do another one. I believe it's not the next example. We'll save that bad boy for tomorrow. Or whenever I see you next. Yeah, tomorrow. Okay, so number 7, we're going to skip ahead to number 7. I'm going to go through the steps. Step 1 says, move the constant. So I'm going to do, what was that 8? Subtractive. X squared minus 4x. Leave a box, put a square, equals negative 8, put a square. So when you move that constant over, there's something that's going to go in that spot. That's our box. How do I find what goes in that box? Negative 4 divided by 2 squared. So negative 2 squared. What is that? Four. Thanks. Okay. So I got to do it to the other side too. Now we factor it. X minus, if you said I didn't hear you, sorry, 2 squared equals, and then I got to add that stuff together, negative 4. We factor this. Now we have this entire side as a square. So what should I do? Square root. But if I square root, plus or minus. So I have x minus 2 equals plus or minus square root negative 4. Oh no. Did we learn about square root of negative numbers though? Oh, so we can do it. We're going to have to break down the square root of 4. Square root of 4 and that hurt me. Square root of 4 and square root of negative 1. I've dropped mine a few times. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of negative 1 is I. So now we have x minus 2 equals plus or minus 2i. We got to do one more thing. We got to add the 2 to the other side, so we have x equals positive 2 plus or minus 2i. And guess what? You can't add those together because one is a real number and one's an imaginary number. You can't add them together, so that's your answers. Fancy brackets. If you are typing it in your computer, you would type like 2 plus 2i and 2 minus 2i for the two answers. And somebody asked earlier today, how do we get the I? It's like literally like the I on the keyboard. Okay. I mean, that's how you're going to do it on the computer. Okay. One more. You try. You try. Number 8. You try. It's really important that you know how to do this stuff today because tomorrow it's going to get like places. Oh, it's not really. I'm just joking, but kind of not really. Yeah. Example 4, for some reason, when if you look at example 4, when you put a number in front of the x squared, it just takes it. It's not even that hard. I promise it's not. But for some reason, people forget the step when there's a number there. But what I'm trying to say is don't skip this homework assignment. That's what I'm really trying to say. Where'd 5 go? You get to move your 5 over? Uh-huh. Divided by 2, 4 squared. Yeah. That's like the 40 square, right? Yeah. Yeah. You're just missing your fancy brackets. You can go get your computer. Fancy brackets. So I'm working it out. Yeah. So for this one, when you square root both sides, 21 you can't do anything with, nothing simplifies. So you just move that 4 over, make it -4 plus or minus square root of 21, done. So grab a computer, log in, start your assignment. The very back of the notes have a huge blank sheet of paper. So if you want to use that as your scratch work, oh, they all out. See, that's what happens when I do the whole day that it tells me. I know, 6th period. I did not read this out. Oh, good question. I did not check my computer. I'll go look. I'm so glad this passed. I know it's section 3.3. Yeah, you know what I didn't do is I didn't write down the numbers like I normally do. I'll for sure post it on Canvas. I'll put it up here. I just didn't write them down, so it'll take me a second to put it up here. Here you go. So the numbers that correlate to the same questions, if you need to do it on paper, are also posted